Hello and welcome to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg and I am here today to do a book haul revisit for the month of May. If you're unfamiliar, this is where I look at book hauls from the month of May in the past to see how many of the books I have read, how many I would still like to read, which ones I have unhauled, and start the process of thinking about which ones I might want to unhaul either now or at some point in the future. It's a way of making myself more accountable as someone who purchases books because money is a limited resource, and I feel like it is important to try to make sure you spend it wisely. And I've learned a lot about myself as a reader as well. For instance, I have learned that I'm more likely to listen to a nonfiction book on audio than I am to read it in print. It's been helpful for that. Does it stop me from buying books? No. But I hope it makes me a more intentional book purchaser. I should also note, because it's been a while since I mentioned this, and occasionally people will comment and say that they love the idea of a book haul revisit. I got the idea from someone else. I got it from Doris at Aldi Books. She, for a period in the past, was doing book haul revisits. She doesn't do them anymore, but I loved the idea and said I would love to do it. And she said, go with it. So I've been doing them ever since. So thank you, Doris, from Aldi Books. Credit where it's due. It was her idea, and I took it from her. And if you would like to take it, please feel free to do so as well. Just one more note before we dive in. Now, because we have 5 years of book hauls to look back at, I have tried to find ways to limit the amount of books that I talk about and try to make this not an hour-long video where I look at a whole bunch of books, because sometimes I will buy a lot of books. I went through a process where I was purchasing all of the books that have won a Pulitzer Prize for fiction. I'm doing a project where I'm trying to read all of those books, and I decided at some point that I wanted to own them. So there are a lot of them, and they took up a lot of time and real estate in book hauls, and it doesn't really make sense to talk about them because they are purchased for a very different purpose than something that is like a new release or that I hear about and think I would like to read that and purchase. That's actually attached to a project. I also had purchased library builders. Like, I decided I wanted to own every copy of Louise Erdrich's books, Toni Morrison's books, and some things like that. So I have removed those. Sue Grafton is another one. I have them piled up here on the top of my bookshelf because I had gotten rid of all of my copies of her book at some point, and I just decided I wanted to have them again. So they were purchased for very different reasons. And because this is all kind of arbitrary at the end of the day anyway, I have removed those. I've also taken out anything that was gifted to me from these. So I'm only including books that I purchased for myself with the intention or hope of reading that book at some point, either in the near or distant future. So those are the books that we are going to be talking about here. If you go to the original book hauls, which will be linked down below, there will probably be more books in there, but that is why those books would not have been included in this revisit. I would also encourage you to check out those original book hauls if you want information about what these books are about, because I will not be really spending time talking about what they're about here. Again, I don't want to make you sit here for an hour while I look back at my old book hauls. So we're going to start with the most recent ones and work our way back. You can see we have a chunk to get through. Here is May of 2023. I'm also going to be bringing a bit of math in to this book haul revisit. Stay tuned for that because I'm not good at math. The first book I brought into my library in May of last year was Flamer by Mike Curato. This is a graphic novel. It is frequently banned, and that is one of the reasons that I purchased it. April and May book hauls are always fun because depending on where Independent Bookstore Day falls, I might get a lot of my Independent Bookstore Day purchases in my May book haul, because if it's late enough in the month, my April book haul has come and gone. So they end up coming into the May book haul. That is the case with this one and a couple of the others, actually. I'll tell you when we get to the ones that were not part of that. But yeah, I was at Montana Book Company. I'm wearing my Loudest Bookstore Ever t-shirt today in honor of them, and saw this book. And because it had been challenged so much and because it sounded interesting, I grabbed a copy of it and brought it home, and I have read it. It's a big success story, and I would recommend it. I think it's a great book, great art as well. So support a banned book and check out Flamer by Mike Curato. Then I had ordered a copy of Wandering Souls by Cecile. This had been on the long list for the Women's Prize and had seemed really interesting to me. So I had kind of wanted to read it. And then when it didn't make the short list, there was sort of an outcry from a handful of people who had read and really loved this book. And that let me know that I should prioritize it and try to get to it quickly. So I ordered a copy from Montana Book Company, and on Independent Bookstore Day, I picked it up. And here it is. And I did read this book. I absolutely loved it. It was one of my favorite reads from last year. I cried. Full disclosure, like at the ending, I was crying so much. Thank goodness Joel was home, that like snot was running down my face, and I was doing that sort of rapid breathing where you're like, so I loved this book. I thought it was absolutely great. I really do think it should have been on the shortlist for the Women's Prize last year. By the way, I will have my reaction to the current shortlist for the Women's Prize for Fiction in the description box down below if you'd like to check out this year's crop of contenders. But I did read this. It was wonderful. Now, temporarily getting away from Independent Bookstore Day, at some point in the month of May, we went to a drag queen story hour at Wheatgrass Books in Livingston, Montana to support them. And that was a whole thing. I'll put the Friday Reads video where we recap the experience in the description box down below as well. And after the story time was over, we browsed the store because we wanted to support them, and I saw a copy of In the Distance by Hernan Diaz. Hernan Diaz had recently won the Pulitzer Prize, co-won the Pulitzer Prize for fiction alongside Demon Copperhead for his book called Trust. And over the years, I have heard good things about In the Distance, so I kind of thought, I didn't really like Trust all that much, but I liked his writing enough that I would try another one of his books. So when I saw In the Distance, I figured I would grab it. And here it is. I have not read it yet, but I would still be willing to get to it at some point. And I've heard really great things about it even since I purchased it. So at some point in the future, I will hopefully read it. The same day, there was also a drag queen story hour at Country Bookshelf in Bozeman. Bozeman and Livingston are not that far. So we went to Livingston because they were having their drag queen story hour in the morning. We're there to support them. And then after it was over, we shopped a little bit and then went to Country Bookshelf, which was still a whole thing. And when I went into the store and we were browsing after the event was over and everything had calmed down, I did something that I found really interesting. I asked one of their booksellers, what is a book that you think more people should know about? And they recommended Sharks in the Time of Saviors, a novel by Kawai Strong Washburn. I have heard good things about this, and what the bookseller said about it was that this had been published right around the time that the pandemic was really settling in and lockdown was hitting. And for that reason, it did get some attention when it was immediately published, and then it just went quiet after that. And she didn't think it got the recognition that it had deserved because of unfortunate timing with lockdown and stores closing down and all of that. And she said she has always been recommending it to people ever since because she wants people to catch up on it. So I looked at it and I'd heard good things about it in the past, so I grabbed it. I have not gotten around to reading it yet, but I still loved that recommendation. And if I go to bookstores in Ireland, I'm actually kind of planning to pull out that question anytime I can, because it is actually a fun thing to do. To just ask a bookseller, because they know these things. So yeah, that was a great recommendation. I will hopefully be getting around to reading it at some point. Now, for one more book, let's go back to Independent Bookstore Day, because on Independent Bookstore Day, I was at Montana Book Company, and I was talking to Chelsea, who was one of the co-owners of the store. And at that time, and actually still, she had gotten obsessed with Eric LaRocca and was talking about Eric LaRocca and really selling him hard. And I said, okay, well, which one is your favorite? And she said, The Trees Grew Because I Bled There, collected stories. Now, I don't read a lot of horror, but neither does Chelsea, really. So that is one of the things that helped sell me on it. It's a beautiful cover, if creepy and a little bit gross. But she definitely sold me on this book, and I purchased it because of her recommendation. I have not read it yet, but I would still really like to. And it looks like it's a tiny book, and I admit, because it is short stories and because it is, I don't think it's even 200 pages. Yeah, it's 204 pages, so it's just over 200 pages. I have really thought about it, and actually this might be a prime candidate to read in October if I'm looking for something with sort of spooky vibes. So I might save it for that, but we will see. Would still like to read it, especially because Chelsea is still really obsessed with Eric LaRocca. So we'll get to it. Then, two books that I almost didn't include because they are from people who are in the Pulitzer family of authors, but they are not the books that they won a Pulitzer Prize for. So flashback last year, the Carol Shields Prize for Fiction was brand new. It was just about to award or did award its first prize. And Sean the Book Maniac did a video talking about the Carol Shields Prize, and he was talking about his experience reading her work. I have read 2 Carol Shields books and liked them, and he really talked about Various Miracles, which is a story collection, and the way he talked about it got me extremely interested in the book. That week I went to my local used bookstore. They had a copy, and I grabbed it. So here it is. I have not gotten around to reading it yet. I think when I do get around to rereading The Stone Diaries, which is her Pulitzer book, it will be interesting to read Various Miracles as well. So purchased as an addendum to my Pulitzer Project, but I decided to include it here because accountability is still good. And for the same reason, I was interested in Hue and Cry, which is a story collection by James Allen McPherson, who was the first Black person to win a Pulitzer Prize for fiction for a story collection called Elbow Room. Now, I have not read that one yet, and I would really like to. So I saw this book on the shelves at my local used bookstore, I think the same day I got Various Miracles, and I looked it up, and there were great reviews of it online, and then I picked it up and looked at it, and it has a preface by Edward P. Jones, who won a Pulitzer Prize for The Known World, which is a 5-star prediction for me from my Pulitzer Prize project. So I was sold pretty hard. Have not read it yet, but I would absolutely like to. So those are the books I brought into my library in May of 2023. I have read 2 of them. Which is not great. The 2 books were Flamer and Wandering Souls. Now here's where I did math. Because I'm bad at math, I asked Google what percentage 2 out of 7 is. And according to Google, that's 29%, which is not terrible, but also not great. The good news is I've unhauled 0 of these 7 books. And I really don't think any of them would be going anywhere anytime soon. If in a year or 2 I haven't read any of the ones that I have not read, I would potentially start thinking about getting rid of In the Distance. Because, as I said, I didn't really like Trust all that much. And although I would like to try another one of Hernan Diaz's books, if we get a year or 2 in the future and I haven't read it, I might be willing to let it go. But for the present, all of these books are going to be staying and not going anywhere anytime soon. Let's go back to May of 2022. This one is complicated because I did 2 different book haul videos that year, because I did a curated book box from Good Neighbor Bookstore in New York, and I did a standard book haul as well. So let's go back and talk about them. The first one is actually an unhaul, but I did read it before I got rid of it. It's Life Went On Anyway, Stories by Oleg Sentsov, translated by William Blacker. So it was a story collection by a Ukrainian author. It's really tiny. I would show it to you if I could, but it's like 100 pages at most. I read it. I liked it. I admit I didn't love it, but it is a Ukrainian author, and that was actually part of why it was in the curated book box, to support Ukrainian stories, and I loved that. And in order to help that, I traded in at my local used bookstore. So it is not here anymore, but I did read it, and I did like it. Just not enough to keep permanently on my shelf. Then the next 2 books were also in that curated book box. There's The Bear by Andrew Kravac, which I admit I have thought about reading and just haven't. So this has come very close to being read, but I haven't gotten there yet. And for that reason, obviously, it's not going to be going around anywhere anytime soon. I would still like to read this book and get to it at some point. Then there's Tiny Americans by Devin Murphy. So I asked Bob, who is the owner of Good Neighbor Books in New York, the same question that I asked that bookseller at Country Bookshelf in Bozeman. Because when you do a curated book box from him, he sort of asks for guidelines. And I asked him a couple of questions, and I don't remember exactly what they were, but one of them was, what is a book that you think more people should know about or talk about? And he said Tiny Americans by Devin Murphy. And this is another one that I have thought about picking up because it's about a complicated family, and I love a book about a complicated family. So, long story short, haven't read it, but would really like to at some point. So, those are both books that I probably wouldn't have found out about on my own, might not have purchased on my own, but I am really interested in reading them. So that was a good call on his part. Now, the other 3 books were things that I found on my own. First is Elena Knows, translated by Frances Riddle and written by Claudia Pinheiro. This I think it was on the shortlist for the International Booker that year. I think that's what put it on my radar, and I really wanted to read it, so I ordered a copy, and I did read it during Women in Translation Month in August, I believe. And it is a great but difficult book, so I would recommend it to you, but just with that caveat that it is a little bit bleak, a little bit difficult, and a great book regardless. So that's Claudia Knows, a success story in this book haul. I'm really disappointed in myself because I still haven't read The Trees by Percival Everett. And I don't know how that has happened, but I haven't read it yet. So I'm actually going to be reading James by Percival Everett first, when I had kind of been thinking that The Trees would be my first, even though he published one book in between The Trees and James called Dr. No. And I really wanted Trees to be my first experience of his writing, and because time has gotten away from me, and again, I don't know how that happened, it just does sometimes, I need to catch up to Trees. By the time you watch this, I might have read James, because to tell the truth, I'm actually filming this in April and scheduling it for when I'm going to be out of the country. It's the magic of the internet. Time means nothing on the internet. But anyway, so I would probably have read James at this point, and I will still need to catch up to The Trees, because I really want to get to this, and I'm shocked and disappointed in myself that I have not. Then, Yerba Buena by Nina LaCour. Now, I have not read this. I admit, I almost thought about an unhaul of this book about a year ago, because the audio is actually available to me. But I was chatting with someone at Montana Book Company named Abby, and she said, out of the blue, like I didn't prompt her or anything, she said, have you read Yerba Buena? And I said, no, but I do have a copy. And she said, you have to read it. It's really good. And I haven't done it still. But because she made that recommendation, I have not thought about getting rid of it since. So she pretty single-handedly saved this book from an unhaul. I have not decided if I would read the physical book or do the print book. It's probably a candidate for my pile of possibilities for Pride Month, and we'll see how that goes. But yeah, I would still like to read it. Again, Abby just saved it from a potential unhaul, because I admit about a year ago, I was thinking, maybe, am I ever going to read this book? If I do, the audio is available, so maybe I should just get rid of it. And she jumped in and said, no. So, of the 6 books I brought into my library in May of 2022, I've only read 2. Now, that matches the number of books that I've read from last year's book haul, but there was one less book in this book haul, so the percentage goes up to 33%. I have read 33% of the books that I hauled in May of 2022, which is at least an improvement, even though the number matched. It is what it is. And there was an unhaul in this one out of the 6, and that was Life Went On Anyway, Stories by Oleg Sentsov, which was a good book, just not something I really felt like I wanted or needed to keep permanently. Let's get back to May of 2021. This is a good one, and this is another place where Independent Bookstore Day comes into play, because 3 of these 5 books came from Independent Bookstore Day. So, flashback to May of 2021. We are in Montana Book Company again, because that's where we go for Independent Bookstore Day. And I was getting book recommendations from Charlie, who is one of the co-owners of the store, and asked sort of a version, like a precursor version of the question, what is a book you've read that more people should know about? And their answer was, have you read The Rain Heron? And they pulled it off the shelf, and I saw the cover, which is gorgeous, and they were actually having a prompt on their reading challenge to choose a book based on the cover. And the second I saw the cover of The Rain Heron, I was like, well, that's the book for that prompt immediately. But then they talked about the book, and it sounded amazing. And I read it, and it is amazing. So I have another Robbie Arnott book on my shelf that I have not gotten around to reading yet, but I have read The Rain Heron, and I would absolutely recommend it to you. And I love this cover. I would fully have this book faced out on my shelves, if not for the fact that, I don't know if you can see, if you hold it up, the cover immediately starts bending out like this, and I don't want to damage the book because I liked it that much. But otherwise, you'd be seeing this up here on my shelf all the time. The only reason it's not faced out is to protect the cover. Then I'm realizing I lied to you. There are 6 books in this book haul for this month. I just don't have one of them. And so 4 out of the books will come from Independent Bookstore Day, because the same day I was recommended This Is How You Lose the Time War by Amal El-Matar and Max Gladstone, also by Charlie. And I read it and I liked it. And Joel read it and he liked it. Same. Like, again, didn't love it, but liked it. And loaned it to a neighbor, I think 2, maybe even 3 years ago at this point. And they still have it. And it's fine. I think part of why it's fine is that I liked the book but didn't love it. So at this point, I'm just going to count it as an unhaul, because even though I didn't, strictly speaking, unhaul it, I don't have it, and it's been long enough that I feel like I can reasonably assume it's not coming back. And another reason why I think it's fine is that if I had that book, I probably would have unhauled it or be thinking about unhauling it because of that liked, not loved factor. So that is This Is How You Lose the Time War. Then, Work Like Any Other by Virginia Reeves, another recommendation from Charlie that came from May of 2021, and another book that I read and liked. It had been longlisted for the Booker Prize back in 2016, back when it was still the Man Booker Prize, and read it, liked it, and it is still here, and I would probably hold on to it. I don't think I would be getting rid of that one, but you never know. You never know. Sometimes if you really need space, you start making tough calls. That is the only reason I would probably think about getting rid of Work Like Any Other. But I liked it enough that I would keep it and hold on to it. The final Independent Bookstore Day connection was Paying the Land by Joe Sacco. This is not a recommendation from Charlie. This was something I saw on the shelf and had heard about. I think I had seen someone talk about it on their channel. So when I saw it, I picked it up and decided to grab a copy of it. And I have read it and I liked it. It does sometimes read a little bit like a textbook. It is nonfiction, but I think it's an important story and it reads very quickly because it is a graphic history. And I would recommend it. Just know that it can be a little bit serious and a little bit dry sometimes, but I'd say it's an urgent enough story that people should read it. So that was another success story, and it came from Independent Bookstore Day. Now, the last 2 had nothing to do with Independent Bookstore Day. I am still on a journey with Colm Tabine because I haven't read one of his books and would like to. And I keep waffling back and forth about which one I should do first. And when I heard about The Story of the Night, I thought to myself, that should be the one. So I ordered a copy and here it is. And I have not read it because I haven't read any of his books yet. And now I've kind of moved away. I think either Brooklyn or Blackwater Lightship will be my first, but I'd still want to read this one. So it's not going anywhere anytime soon. And hopefully I will, by this time next year, have read a Colm Tabine book. Maybe it will be that one. Maybe it won't, but maybe I'll have read one of them. The final book in my May of 2021 book haul was How to Resist Amazon and Why. And that was not this version, but this is the version that is updated and expanded. So I figured I would hold this one up. But How to Resist Amazon and Why is exactly what it sounds like. It's the fight for local economies, data privacy, fair labor, independent bookstores, and a people-powered future by Danny Kane, who is one of the co-owners of the Raven Bookstore in Kansas. It's a tiny book. There's an audio that is really short as well, so I would recommend it to you. I am primed to have listened to what this is about, and yes, I think it's a perfect book. We display this on our coffee table, in fact. So, of the books, the 6 books I brought into my library in May of 2021, I've read 5. So I get to be really smug right now. That is 83% according to Google. It feels like it should be more, but I'll take what Google says. I've unhauled 1, and that, again, is sort of a technicality because I didn't choose to unhaul This Is How You Lose the Time War, but it's not here. And at this point, it's fine. It's not part of my library. It hasn't been in a long time, and it probably won't be anytime soon. So I'm counting it as an unhaul. Now, we're going to May of 2020. This is an interesting one because when I did my book haul revisit for April, there was a unique month where I didn't have any of the books anymore. They had all been unhauled. And that is May of 2020. The difference is there was only 1 book in my May of 2020 book haul, which was The Knockout Queen by Ruby Thorpe. And eventually I just realized I am probably not going to get around to this book. And if I do, I would probably do it on audio. So at that point, I just said goodbye and let it go. And you can imagine at that point that my read results for that month are 0 out of 1. My unhaul results are 1 out of 1. I will let you do the math on that one because I don't even need Google for that one. It's a big fat 0 for how many I have read, and it's 100% for how many I have unhauled. Let's just go back to 2019, when there were 3 books that meet our criteria for this book haul revisit, and let's talk about them. First is The House of the Spirits by Isabel Allende. Part of why I purchased this one is that in 2019, I think that was the year I was doing my Read Outside Your Comfort Zone challenge, and there was I talk about it a fair amount. That is the reading goal that made me stop doing reading goals, because it was so multifaceted that by the end of the year I was stressing myself out and I had been failing at it, so I decided to just cancel the reading goal completely. So one of the prongs of that was that I wanted to read at least one book from every continent other than, Antarctica. And this was the one that I was giving myself as an option for South America, and I have not read it. I was going to try to cram it in at the end of the year, but then when I realized that there was no way I could reasonably complete the challenge without stressing myself out, I just let it go. And I would still like to read The House of the Spirits. It does better as a library builder for me, because it's something that I would like to have on my shelf, so I might get to it at some point in the future. There was no, I kind of wanted to get to it as part of that goal, but I should have been really thinking about it as not immediate plans, but at some point in the future, it would be nice. And that is The House of the Spirits. Then, The Women of Brewster Place by Gloria Naylor. In 2019, it was my first full year on BookTube. I did a book tag about Choose the Year. I chose 1982, which was the year this was published. And it really brought this book back on my radar, and I read it, and I liked it. So I would recommend this to you. It is linked stories because it is a collection of stories about women who are living on Brewster Place. Go figure. And it's really great. I would like to read more Gloria Naylor, but this is still the only one that I own. So at some point, I will probably be doing something similar to what I did for Louise Erdrich. I would probably try another one of her books first before committing to that. But I've heard good things about Mama Day. Point is, for our purposes, I read The Women of Brewster Place, and it is a success story. It's not going anywhere anytime soon, and neither is The House of the Spirits. I should clarify that as well. The final book for this entire book haul revisit is Amateur, A Reckoning with Gender, Identity, and Masculinity by Thomas Page McBee. I did read this. I believe I read it during Pride Month. I don't think it was in 2019. I don't think it was even 2020. Maybe it was 2021, somewhere around there. Point is, I read it at some point. I ended up listening to the audio, which is read by Thomas Page McBee. And it is interesting because it talks about a reckoning with gender, identity, and masculinity. And I found it to be really interesting. I didn't love it, but I found it to be really interesting. And for that reason, I would recommend it to you. And for that reason, it will have a probably permanent place on my shelf. So, of the 3 books that qualify for this book haul revisit that I brought into my library in 2019, I have read 2 out of 3, and according to Google, that's 66.7%. And I've unhauled 0. And again, not one of them is going to be going anywhere anytime soon. They are all very free to hang out, and I'll get to them when I get to them. If specifically The House of the Spirits, I've read the other 2 already. So overall, looking at 5 May book hauls, I have read 11 out of 23 books. And that, according to Google, is 48%. That's almost half. I feel pretty good about that. It would be a little bit better if it was a little more than half. Sure. But I'll take 48%. I will take it. I will never complain about that. And I have unhauled 3 out of that 23, which is, according to Google, 13%. And that feels pretty good as well. So if you have thoughts about any of these books, if you want to make a recommendation for why I should prioritize any of these books, or make a case, if you want to tell me which one you think I should get rid of, let me know that as well. And if you want to make a case for why I should hold on to something that I had been thinking I might get rid of at some point in the future, let me know that in the comment section down below as well. As always, I really appreciate your time, and I will be back. Until next time, happy reading.